For decades, Richard Gere was one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. He was the charming leading man, the romantic hero, the actor who could walk into a scene and make audiences believe in love, confidence, and quiet mystery. From American Gigolo to An Officer and a Gentleman, and then to the global phenomenon of Pretty Woman, Gere became more than a movie star. He became a symbol of old Hollywood elegance. But behind the perfect smile, the red carpets, and the unforgettable roles, there was always another Richard Gere, a man who seemed restless inside the world that made him famous. While Hollywood celebrated his beauty and star power, Gere was searching for something deeper. He wanted meaning, he wanted peace, he wanted a life that did not depend only on applause. And over time, that search changed everything. Richard Gere's story did not begin with luxury or fame. He was born in Philadelphia and raised in a middle-class family, far from the glamorous world he would later enter. Before Hollywood knew his name, he was a young man with talent, curiosity, and a strong interest in music, performance, and philosophy. He was not simply chasing fame from the beginning. There was always something thoughtful about him, something inward-looking, something different from the typical Hollywood star. As a young actor, Gere slowly built his career through stage work and early screen roles. He had the looks of a leading man, but he also carried a quiet seriousness that made him stand out. Hollywood began to notice him because he did not feel ordinary on screen. He had intensity, but also restraint. He could appear distant, romantic, confident, and vulnerable all at once. Then came the roles that changed his life. In American Gigolo, Richard Gere became a style icon. The film gave him a sleek, modern image and introduced him as one of the most magnetic actors of his generation. Then An Officer and a Gentleman turned him into a true Hollywood leading man. Audiences connected with his character's struggle, pride, and emotional transformation. By the time Pretty Woman arrived in 1990, Gere was no longer just famous. He was part of cinematic history. Opposite Julia Roberts, he helped create one of the most beloved romantic films of all time. The chemistry, the charm, the fairy tale feeling, everything worked. For millions of fans, Richard Gere became the man in the suit, the quiet billionaire with a guarded heart, the romantic figure who seemed impossible to forget. But fame can create an image so powerful that the real person disappears behind it. To the public, Gere looked like a man who had everything: fame, beauty, wealth, movie success, admiration. But behind the scenes, he was becoming increasingly connected to a different path. Richard Gere had long been interested in Buddhism, meditation, and spiritual reflection. He developed a deep connection to Tibetan Buddhism and became an outspoken supporter of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people. This was not a small part of his life. It became central to who he was. In an industry often built on silence, image control, and business relationships, Gere chose to speak openly about human rights. His support for Tibet made him respected by many, but it also created complications. Hollywood had become increasingly connected to the Chinese market, and Gere's public criticism of China made him a difficult figure for major studios to embrace. Over time, many observers noticed that Gere was no longer appearing in the same kind of large Hollywood films that once defined his career. Gere himself has spoken publicly about how his political views affected his opportunities. Whether people saw it as courage, controversy, or career sacrifice, one thing became clear. Richard Gere was not willing to trade his beliefs for another blockbuster. And that is where his story becomes different from many Hollywood legends. Some stars fight desperately to stay in the spotlight. Some reshape themselves again and again just to remain visible. But Gere seemed to move in another direction. He continued acting, but he also stepped further away from the center of Hollywood power. He became known not only as an actor, but as a humanitarian, activist, and spiritual seeker. Still, his private life was not without pain. In the 1990s, his marriage to supermodel Cindy Crawford became one of the most talked about celebrity relationships of the era. They were beautiful, famous, and constantly watched by the media. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect Hollywood couple, but public attention can place enormous pressure on a relationship. Their marriage eventually ended, and both moved forward with their lives. Later, Gere married actress Carey Lowell. Their relationship brought him into a new chapter, especially when he became a father to his son Homer. Fatherhood changed Gere deeply. For a man who had spent years in film sets, airports, interviews, and public causes, becoming a father gave his life a new emotional center. Fame was no longer the most important thing. Family became more important than image. But that marriage also ended after years together, and the separation was widely covered by the media. Again, Gere's personal life became public conversation. Again, people saw only pieces of the story from the outside. Divorce, especially under public attention, is never simple, but Gere did not turn his pain into a spectacle. He stayed private, controlled, and careful. Then came another unexpected chapter. Richard Gere found love again with Alejandra Silva, a Spanish publicist and activist. Their relationship attracted attention partly because of their age difference, but also because it seemed to bring Gere into a calmer and more family-centered stage of life. Together, they welcomed children, giving Gere a new experience of fatherhood later in life. For many fans, this was surprising. Richard Gere, once the ultimate Hollywood romantic figure, was now living a quieter life focused on his wife, children, charity, and personal peace. He was no longer chasing the same Hollywood spotlight that once surrounded him. Instead, he appeared to be choosing a life with more meaning and less noise. In recent years, reports about Gere's move toward life in Spain, including Madrid, added another layer to his story. It felt symbolic. The man who once represented Hollywood glamour was now stepping away from Hollywood itself, not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in search of something more grounded. And then health reminded him, as it reminds everyone, that life is fragile. At an older age, Gere reportedly faced pneumonia while traveling with family. For any parent, illness can be frightening, but for a father with young children later in life, it carries a deeper emotional weight. It makes questions of time, legacy, and family feel more urgent. Gere survived, but the moment reminded many fans that the stars they grew up watching are human too. They age, they face illness, they worry about their families, they think about what they will leave behind. That is why Richard Gere's story still touches people. It is not only about movies, it is not only about fame disappearing, it is about a man who reached the top of Hollywood and then decided that the top was not enough. He had the romantic image, he had the global recognition, he had the career many actors dream of. But he also had the courage to ask a harder question. What is fame worth if it costs you your values? For Gere, the answer seemed clear. He chose activism even when it affected his career. He chose spirituality even when Hollywood preferred glamour. He chose privacy when fame demanded performance. He chose family when the industry still wanted the old version of him. And perhaps that is why audiences continue to respect him. Richard Gere may not dominate Hollywood in the way he once did, but his absence from the biggest studio films has created a different kind of legacy. He became an example of what happens when a celebrity refuses to be owned by fame. His career did not end because he lacked talent. His story changed because he followed a different path. Fans remember him for Pretty Woman, for An Officer and a Gentleman, for the elegance and charm that made him unforgettable. But they also remember the man behind those roles, the man who spoke about Tibet, supported humanitarian causes, practiced Buddhism, and tried to live with purpose. That does not mean his life was perfect. No life is. He experienced divorce, public criticism, career shifts, and personal challenges. But his journey shows something rare in Hollywood, a star who did not seem afraid to become quieter. In a world where fame often rewards noise, Richard Gere chose stillness. In a business where many people protect their image at any cost, he protected his beliefs. And in an industry built on youth, attention, and constant reinvention, he found meaning in family, service, and peace. At 76, Richard Gere's story feels less like a Hollywood tragedy and more like a Hollywood lesson. He did not vanish. He changed direction. He moved away from the machine that once made him famous and built a life that seemed closer to his values. The world may always remember him as the handsome star of unforgettable romantic films. But the deeper story is about a man who discovered that success without peace was not enough. In the end, Richard Gere's life was never only about fame. It was about choosing integrity when silence would have been easier. It was about choosing family when the spotlight still called his name. And it was about understanding that sometimes the most powerful ending is not a comeback, not a scandal, and not one final performance. Sometimes the most powerful ending is a man walking away from Hollywood, not because he lost everything, but because he finally found what mattered most.